Good afternoon. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you today about special collections at UT Arlington. Let's see if this, no, it works, good. I'm going to try to keep my portion brief so that Brenda can have the major part of our time to talk about what you'll really find of interest, and that's the documents we have that support research in the Texas Revolution. Brenda and I are two members of a staff of 11 in special collections. Two of that number only work for us part-time, but despite that, we're able to keep our doors open to researchers 6 days a week. We do welcome members of the public, as well as our own UTA community. Our staff have varying areas of specialty based on their technical and subject expertise and the formats under their care. Formats can be photographs, manuscripts, maps, books, and we have an area of Spanish language materials in which one of our staff specializes. Subjects we have include local history, Texas, the university's history, Mexico, cartography. Our technical skills include things like reference, helping the public, and we all do that, and special areas like cataloging, digitization, and preservation. My own specialty used to be archival description, but these days I specialize in report writing, troubleshooting, and attending meetings. And that's really why it's going to be Brenda who's going to spend the time talking to you about the documents, because they're under her direct care. Special collections, as we know it today, officially began in 1967 with the creation of the Texas Labor Archives. George Green, who is still a professor in the history department at UTA today, began collecting labor union records. In 1970, the archives expanded to include university records and Texas political collections. While that was happening, and even before, other events were underway which would have a profound impact on the future of our special collections. A Fort Worth couple, Jenkins and Virginia Garrett, had begun their personal collections, his in Texas and the Mexican War, and hers in the cartography of Texas, the Gulf Coast, and the Greater Southwest. In 1974, new quarters were constructed in our library, and Mr. Garrett donated his materials consisting of books, manuscripts, graphics, broadsides, sheet music, and newspapers as the primary examples of the formats. Mrs. Garrett wasn't yet finished with her collection, and she made us wait for it a while longer. In 1980, the Garrett collection merged administratively with the Archives collection and became special collections. In 1984, we acquired the Fort Worth Star-Telegram archives. These consisted mainly of photographic negatives and prints, also included vertical files and clippings and some other materials. We're not, frankly, sure just exactly how many images are in that collection because it's so large, but it's estimated to be 1 million images. This, of course, initiated a new collecting focus for us in photographs. This collection is today our most heavily used collection. In 1997, we did receive Mrs. Garrett's collection of maps. The Virginia Garrett Cartographic Library was established in her honor, and her donation of these maps capped a map collection at UTA that she had worked for years to develop. Today, our collecting areas remain primarily those established in those early days: Texas, Mexico, primarily its political history from 1810 to 1920, including the Mexican War, cartography, the university's history, and Texas politics and labor. Some things do change with time, and these days we devote much of our time as the staff, in addition to helping researchers and preparing materials for researchers to use on our premises, to activities including digital projects, in which we provide access to selected, and I emphasize that word because the day will not come in my lifetime when we have the entire contents of our archives digitized, but we do make efforts. We are proceeding down the road to put as much as we can online, and as examples of that, you may have seen, if you visited our website in the last few years, our Cartographic Connection site, which was established in the late 90s with the support of the Houston Endowment, and was designed to enable school teachers to use maps in their classrooms. We have the Tejano Voices website, which is something completely different. It is a presentation online of our part of our collection. We still have a lot of work to do. We have more interviews with Texas Mexican-American political leaders. And if you go to that collection, you can not only see the entire transcript, but you can hear the audio of the full interviews, not just clips. The project we presently have underway will be to put some of our photographs online from one of our local photography collections. We also work to digitize our finding aids so that that information can be available to researchers at their convenience. And we have spent a lot more time in the past few years doing outreach not only to our university community and our local community, but especially to younger people. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had about 100 fourth graders in special collections as part of a broader tour they were having of the university libraries. So we help people of any ages, and we also spend a lot of time working with adult groups, primarily service groups and interest groups who are interested in having us come to speak to them. And the reason I point this out to you is just to emphasize that we don't stay in anymore and wait for people to come to us. We're really working hard trying to get the word out about the resources we have available for research. We're also working on adding new things to the library's holdings and on encouraging people to use them. We certainly hope you will feel welcome to do this and that you will be motivated to come see us after you hear Brenda talk about some of our holdings in which we think you'll be especially interested. Thank you.
We work as a team. My watch quit me yesterday. I would like to echo Ann's comments about we're very, very grateful to have the opportunity to come and speak to you at the San Jacinto Symposium and to be a part of it and to bring some of the wonderful documents that we have on display in the vendor area and exhibitors area, and hope that you will come and use them at UT Arlington. Ann and I have selected a few extraordinary materials that are specifically related to the Texas Revolution, to illustrate to you the depth of the wonderful collections that we have of manuscript and cartographic materials in special collections. A great place to start is with the 3 foundation documents of the Republic of Texas. We're one of 3 libraries in the country to have original broadside copies of all 3 documents. The first is the Declaration of Grievances, which was written on June 22nd, 1835. It was drafted in Spanish at San Felipe. It outlines the specific grievances inflicted upon Texas by the Mexican government and urges Texas citizens to preserve the rights under Mexico's 1824 federal constitution, by which Texas enjoyed sovereignty as part of a confederation of Mexican states. At the same meeting, William Barrett Travis was authorized to move against the Mexican Customs House at Anahuac, marking the beginning of the Texas Revolution. The second document is the Declaration of Causes for taking up arms against Mexico, drafted November 7, 1835. It is second in importance only to the Declaration of Independence and declares that the people of Texas have taken up arms in defense of the principles of the Mexican Federal Constitution of 1824. It denies the right of Mexican authorities to govern Texas and noted that Texas would not cease its war against authorities as long as Mexican troops remained in Texas. It also offers land in return for military service. The third and the most important is the Declaration of Independence, written on March 2nd, 1836, at Washington on the Brazos. It dissolves the political connection with Mexican nation and declares the people of Texas now constitute a free, sovereign, and independent republic. Our copy is a personal copy that belonged to George Smythe of Jasper. He was one of the signers of the Declaration, and see, his signature is right about in here. He has corrected the spelling of his name from Smith to Smythe. And what makes our copy exceptional is the back side of it, which is on the right, in which he recounted to his family his experiences at this convention. So it is a very, very special document. And the family kept it not because of the declaration that's on the front, but because of his letter to them that's on the back. These things, by the way, are part of Jenkins Garrett's collection and some of the initial materials that came to special collections in the late 1970s, early 1980s, mid-1970s. The next collection I think you'll find very interesting is the San Jacinto prisoner of war parole documents. And there are a number of pieces in this collection. It's small. In addition to the two that I'm showing you, and there's a third on display in the exhibitors area, there is additional correspondence. But this happens to be the parole of honor of Mexican Army officers dated April 28, 1837. 31 Mexican Army officers were captured at San Jacinto, were paroled under the terms of this document. They pledged ourselves as gentlemen, officers, and soldiers that we will be guilty of no infraction of this parole of honor. The signers include, right at the top, Manuel de la Portilla. He is brother of Jose Nicolas Portilla, Mexican Army Lieutenant Colonel who carried out Santa Anna's orders to execute the Texian prisoners from Goliad. The man signing right underneath him was Pedro Francisco Delgado. His name has been mentioned a number of times this morning already. He was a member of General Santa Anna's staff. He also wrote his own account of the Battle of San Jacinto. And on the third document that is not, we're not showing you on the screen, but is in the exhibitors area in our exhibit case, he certified the marks of soldiers on a parole document dated May 1st, 1837. They were not literate. They made marks next to their name, and he certified that they were indeed the ones that were making their marks. And on the bottom of the second page is the signature of Martin Perez de Cos. And a lot has been said about him this morning as well. Mexican Army General. He dispersed the legislature of Coahuila in Texas in a session at Monclova, landed 300 men at Matagorda Bay, then established his headquarters at San Antonio de Bayard in 1835. Benjamin Milam, in December 1835, after the siege of Bayard, caused Cos to surrender. And at that time, he was released with a pledge not to further oppose the Constitution of 1824, but the Texans felt that he had violated that when he was part of the group that attacked the Alamo in 1836. The second document I wanted to show you is a list of Mexican officers who died at Liberty. All these prisoners, all these documents were written at Liberty. And all of these 8 gentlemen passed away between October and December of 1835. It appears that it was written by General Cos. His signature is at the bottom, which matches the one on the parole document, and the writing on the remainder of the document appears consistent with his signature. It's in Spanish. The column to the left lists the corps from which the officers were from. There was the Battalion Matamoros, the Battalion Activo de Tampico, the Battalion Activo de Toluca, and the Battalion Activo de Querétaro. It also lists their brevet rank and their class, and then the column on the right lists their name. And interestingly, each name is preceded by the word Don, and lists their name and the date of death. It does not give a cause of death. Another collection that Mr. Garrett made available to us is the Republic of Texas collection. And in it are a group of sundry documents. There are a few which they're all very interesting to me, but specifically I wanted to show you 2 documents that relate to Juan and Seguin's Tejano volunteers. The first one is I would call it an affidavit, listing the names of Seguin's Tejano volunteers at the storming of Bayard, October to December of 1835. The document is dated February 10th, 1858, and it replaces a document that was sent to the Adjutant General's office prior to its burning. And it lists, it's a 4-page document, and we've just scanned 2 pages to show you, but you see that Juan Seguin is listed as the captain, and his officers are the 3 officers are below, and then the soldados are listed on the rest of this page and on a second page. And they said that they had performed good and valuable service and remained at their post until the surrender of General Cos. The second document is a petition in support of the Tejano volunteer pensions, and it was written in San Antonio on January 12, 1875, to Stephen H. Darden, who was the Comptroller of Public Accounts at that time. It recounts the participation of some 277 men of Mexican birth that participated in the Texas Revolution between October 1835 and the Battle of San Jacinto. And the purpose of the document was to document the service of these individuals in support of their pension applications, which had been previously denied, and particularly those who were in service with Juan Seguin. The document talks about that the first unit was formed on October 25th, 1835, when 37 men of Mexican birth gathered on the banks of Salado Creek, the first Texan forces to gather to oppose a central government proclaimed by Santa Anna in violation of the 1824 Constitution. And it goes ahead and recounts their service at the Battle of Concepcion, the siege and storming of Bayard, the Battle of Gonzales, and the Battle of San Jacinto. It actually gives an accounting, a numerical accounting, and they said there were at least 160 Tejano volunteers at Bayard, and then there were 117 at San Jacinto, and they were trying to rectify the additional numbers because Juan Seguin only reported 22 as fighting with him at San Jacinto. And it goes on to tell where all these additional people were. For instance, 30 were escorting American families, 10 were with Deaf Smith, 3 were at San Felipe, 20 were at Harrisburg or were disabled, and 4 were with the horses, and 22 fought at San Jacinto. So it's a very, very interesting document. At the end, there is a small piece of paper which has been glued to the original document, and it has the signatures of the petitioners, including Juan Seguin, who's the arrow is pointing to his signature. Another collection that I think you may find of interest is the Texas Navy collection. The Texas Navy, there are some additional documents from the Republic of Texas collection that are on exhibit. One is a First Lieutenant's commission from December 19, 1835. A man by the name of A.H. Jones received an appointment as First Lieutenant in the 1st Regiment of the Artillery of the Regular Army of Texas, and he was to report to Colonel J.W. Fannin at Matagorda. There is also a receipt, I'm calling it a receipt, signed and written actually by William Barrett Travis for a horse that he obtained from a man by the name of Wiley Jones, and he asked the government of Texas to pay Jones $80 for that horse. The third one that we brought with us is a Kentucky Volunteers expense voucher. It's a request for the Provisional Government of Texas to pay Captain Tarleton $443.69 for expenses incurred by his company from Louisville, Kentucky to this place, which was Bayard. The Texas Navy collection is, again, a very small collection, but it has some very interesting material in it. The Texas Navy was organized in November 1835 to protect the lines of supply between New Orleans and Texas during the Texas Revolution, and it existed until 1843. Included in this are a few records of the Navy and its officers, and one of the most interesting ones was a letter regarding the return of the schooners Brutus and Invincible from New York for repairs. It was written in December 29, 1836. And those 2 schooners saw service during the Texas Revolution, and they were sent to New York for repair, and Texas couldn't afford to get them out of the repair dock. from this letter, it appeared that the Brutus was going to be taken care of, but Texas could not pay the debt, and they were risking that the schooner would be sold. The letter outlines a plan to sell land scrip to raise money to satisfy the debt on the Invincible so that it might be released. And this was going to one place that they were going to do this was in Richmond, Virginia. It goes on and talks about the concern about the invasion of Texas by sea, and that the Mexican possession of the Gulf would continue to have a powerful influence in the delay and postponement of recognition of the independence of Texas. And apparently Samuel Swartout came to the rescue and helped get the Invincible back to Texas. We also have something called the Texas Currency and Land Scrip Collection. And although the bulk of the material is from the Republic of Texas and the Confederate States of America, there's a handful of documents that fall in the dates of the Texas Revolution. One I thought was particularly interesting, the earliest is December 30th, 1835. I would call it it's perhaps a check or a draft to James Williams for $13 for hauling 2,389 pounds of public stores from Gonzales to the 40-mile watering place on the road to Bear. Another collection is the McKinney and Milam family papers. Colin McKinney, especially those of you who are from the north central Texas, recognize the name of Collin County in the city of McKinney. Well, those both were named for Colin McKinney, who was a major figure in the settlement of northeast Texas and was a signer of the Texas Declaration of Independence. He was a member of the Republic of Texas Congress and representing the Red River County. He was also a planter and merchant and lay preacher and justice of the peace. And I've included this to give you an example of the personal papers. What we've talked about are really documents. But in this collection, there are letters from family and friends asking for information on moving to Texas and for news of the war for Texas independence. There's also a notice that there would be a meeting held at McKinney's house on April 20th, 1836 to find volunteers to send to fight in the Texas Army. And another document signed by McKinney and others pledging money and supplies to the company of Red River County volunteers that were to go. The last thing that we're going to show you out of the Garrett collection is William Physick Zuber. It's from the William Physick Zuber papers. William Physick Zuber was served in the Texas Revolution under Captain James Gillespie, the 6th Company, 2nd Regiment of Texas Volunteers at the Battle of San Jacinto. He was a charter member of the Texas State Historical Association and wrote quite a bit about the history of the Texas Revolution and other Texas history projects. The collection contains primarily correspondence describing his early life in Texas, beginning in 1830. But he was also writing to Captain Gillespie's daughters, and in that he relates a lot of detailed information about the events of the Revolution while serving under their father, Captain Gillespie, from March 1st to June 1st of 1836, particularly the Battle of San Jacinto, and includes biographical information on Gillespie and talks a lot about Sam Houston's activities in the capture of Santa Ana and other topics related to San Jacinto. There is one photograph in the collection, and I found it extremely interesting. It is a photograph in that the top of it has General Sam Houston on the left and Stephen F. Austin on the right, and a man by the name of Crawford, who was the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence. And the 5 gentlemen on the bottom were 5 veterans that attended the last reunion of San Jacinto veterans. Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Zuber is shown on the left. He's holding an extended Texas flag. They're sitting on Colonel Fannon's cannon from Goliad. And I understand that this gentleman on the right is Alphonse Steele. I understand there's some descendants of Mr. Steele here today? The last survivor, okay. Mr. Zuber was one of the last survivors. And I think there's a Mr. Darlington here, and Mr. Lawler, it's hard to see, but he has a bandage over his eye. Mr. Zuber said that those 2 were Revolution veterans, but they were not at San Jacinto. But it's a very, very interesting photo, and it's out in the exhibit area for you to see. The reunion was in 1906, April 21st, 1906 was the last reunion. And I don't know, how long did Mr. Steele live? Mr. Zuber lived till 1913. Yeah. Pardon? Okay. We also wanted to talk about the William A. Philpott Jr. collection. And Jeff Dunn talked a little bit about Mr. Philpott this morning. Mr. Philpott was a Dallas resident. He was secretary of the Texas Bankers Association from 1915 to 1964, so I guess he knew banking pretty well. And he had an acclaimed collection of books, maps, historical manuscripts, national banknotes, and coins. And there were some significant documents that laid in the quiet repose in his collection for decades. Through an interesting odyssey of events, they have found their way to University of Texas at Arlington, and that has been made possible. Jeff Dunn originally told us about the availability of the materials, and the Summerlee Foundation of Dallas made it possible for us to have them. We're very grateful for that. There are 215 documents in the collection. 25% of them pertain to James Morgan, who we've talked also about this morning, an early Texas settler, merchant, and land speculator, and military commander of Galveston during the Texas Revolution. Of course, the most important, we feel, document in the collection is the Emily D. West employment contract. Uh-oh.
Where did it go?
It was there when we were in Arlington. Uh-oh.
Better that than the real one.
That's right. Well, better than the slide, you can go out and see the original in just a moment. I hope you have already. It was written in New York, October 26, 1835. James Morgan was there trying to obtain financing for his New Washington Association and successfully did so. Emily D. West was one of 14 people that he hired at that point to bring to Texas. She agreed to work for a year for $100 annual wage, which she could be paid quarterly if she so desired. And Morgan was to provide her transportation to Texas as well. By contrast, there are, I believe, a total of 6 employment contracts in the collection, and it's interesting to see what services that Morgan was unable to obtain here locally. But one man was by the name of Thomas Blair. Now remember, Emily was to receive $100 a year. Mr. Blair was a ditcher and a gardener, and by contrast, he was earning $15 a month. So he was making a lot more money than the housekeeper. When we first saw the document, we were not expecting to see her handwritten signature. We were always expecting a mark, but she had a very beautiful, neat, delicate hand, which is a clue to at least to her literacy. It's witnessed by Simeon Jocelyn, a prominent New Haven minister and an outspoken opponent of slavery. And as Jeff chronicled to you this morning, it's one of 3 documents and really the earliest piece of evidence of Emily West, and actually brings her to Texas. The Morgan employment contract is the first. The passport application, when she is desirous of leaving Texas, the application was to the Secretary of State of the Republic of Texas, and that document resides at the Texas State Archives. It says she was a free woman of color who immigrated to Texas with Morgan and now is anxious to return, and that her free papers were lost at San Jacinto. And then the William Ballard Journal in 1842, where he reports that the Battle of San Jacinto was probably lost to the Mexicans owing the influence of a mulatto girl belonging to Colonel Morgan, who was closeted in the tent with General Santa Anna. And it was this diary entry that led to mid-20th century speculation that Emily West is the one by whom the Civil War era song "The Yellow Rose of Texas" was written. Another interesting item, well, the Morgan collection is quite interesting, but another piece that I want to point out to you has a direct bearing on this conference was a letter that he wrote on November 4th, 1836. We don't have the original letter, we have his copy of it, but he wrote it to the Secretary of War, and it looks like there were a number of other people that he issued the letter to, alluding that allegations of impropriety during his tenure, alluding that there may have been allegations of impropriety during his tenure as commander at Galveston. Another item that I wanted to show you out of the Philpott collection is the McCullough promissory note, and I find this of particular interest as well. I hope, yes, yay. It's dated March 15th, 1836, and Sam McCullough Sr. and his son Samuel McCullough Jr. By this promissory note, promised to pay John Alley $1,500 as partial payment for a third league of land in Jackson County, Texas. Just 2 days before, they had received word in Gonzales that the Alamo had fallen. And that very day, Houston retreated from Gonzales to the Colorado River, and civilians began to flee to the east in what has become known as the Runaway Scrape. The uncertainty of the times is reflected in the terms of the note. It says, in the event that the McCulloughs lost their land by the Mexicans driving all the Americans out of the country, the note would become null and void. And interesting about Sam McCullough, he lived from 1810 to Sam McCullough Jr., excuse me. He was a free black soldier in the Texas Revolution, born in South Carolina. He moved with his white father and 3 sisters to Jackson County, Texas in May of 1835. In October 5th, 1835, the younger McCullough joined the Matagorda Volunteer Company. And for 4 days, he fought at Goliad, where a musket ball crushed his shoulder, crippling him for life. He was the first Texan. My source said he was the first Texan casualty of the Revolution. At the time of his contract, McCullough Jr. was recuperating at home in Jackson County. And in April 1836, he and others in the area fled to stay ahead of the retreating Texan army. The musket ball was finally removed from his shoulder on July 8, 1836. And from 1852 to 1893, when he passed away, Sam McCullough Jr. And his family lived in Bayard County, where he was a farmer and a cattleman. So I thought this was a very, very interesting document. And when I discovered the story behind this, Jeff, I just said, oh, this Philpott collection gets more wonderful every time I look at it. I'm going to conclude our presentation today in showing you some of the maps that we have. We have a very rich resource of maps and cartographic history materials which are held in the Virginia Garrett Cartographic History Library. And the first one is the Stephen F. Austin map of Texas with parts of the adjoining states, published by Tanner out of Philadelphia in 1836. Stephen Austin pledged to compile a map of the province as part of his agreement for the colonization grant he received in 1823. And he spent 6 years observing the region and gathering information from travelers and surveyors. The map was printed and distributed by Philadelphia publisher Henry Tanner, who first issued, the first edition was issued in 1830. The map was reissued 4 times over the next 10 years, including this 1836 edition map. It's the most accurate depiction of the region at the time and was the basis for other cartographic or other cartographers and publishers. And it shows the boundaries portray Mexican Texas, and it shows the Nueces River right here as the boundary, southern boundary. Austin intended the map to be of assistance in settlement, and there is a panel explaining the colonization grant system and lists the names of the impresarios and the number of the families in each colony that were allowed under the contracts. The next one is the John Arrowsmith map. It's called the Map of Texas, compiled from surveys recorded in the Land Office of Texas and other official surveys. It was published in London by Arrowsmith in 1841. It was published during the time of the Republic of Texas and acknowledged Great Britain's acceptance of the new republic. Arrowsmith was the first to show the full extent of Texas claims in the upper Rio Grande Valley, up in here. And there's also an inset of Galveston Bay with soundings provided, which provided information for the best route to the new city of Houston. It also located Indian tribes' major roadways and made many editorial comments such as excellent land and delightful country. The best information of Texas geography available in Europe, during which the political fate of Texas was of international concern. And the last map that we're going to show you is William Emery's Map of Texas and the Countries Adjacent, compiled in the Bureau of Topographical Engineers from the best authorities, published in Washington, D.C. by the War Department in 1844. This particular map was attached to the Treaty of Annexation in 1844, which was originally sent to the U.S. Senate for ratification by President John Tyler. The treaty, negotiated by John Calhoun, the American Secretary of State, and James Pinckney Henderson, the Texas Minister to the United States. The treaty failed ratification and became a hot political issue in the 1844 election of James K. Polk. After the election, Congress voted to annex Texas by a joint resolution. But it's the most popular and best map of the region at the time. More than 6,000 copies were printed between 1844 and 1845. And the map displays vast territorial claims of the Republic of Texas and was the first to display these boundaries as set by the First Texian Congress in 1836. The United States accepted the Texian boundary claims to the Rio Grande, which resulted in the war with Mexico the following year. And that concludes the maps and documents that we wanted to show you today. We wanted to show you again the areas in which our special collections focus: history of Texas, the history of cartography, the U.S. war with Mexico, 1846 to 1848, and the history of Mexico, 1810 to 1920, UTA history. And we wanted to remind you again that we have a variety of formats, not just books, but manuscript material and archival materials, maps, photographs, and negatives, oral history interviews, graphics, sheet music, microfilm, and artifacts. We have a wonderful, wonderful collection. We want to serve you, and we hope that you'll come and see us at UT Arlington. Thank you very much for having us here.